Hi, I'm Lanice Brothers, a registered nutritionist, women's health, hormone, and menstrual cycle coach, and the founder of Eat, Love, Move, a nutrition and well-being practice. This is the Period Story Podcast, where in each episode, I sit down with a guest to talk about their period story. We get behind some of the myths and misconceptions about periods and so much more. Now, on to today's guest. On today's episode, we have Jasmin Thomas. Jasmin is the founder of Ohana CBD, a vegan, functional, and CBD-fused skincare company. Ohana products are 100% natural and contain unique formulations that combine powerful plant properties that serve the skin from seed to salve. Jasmin was diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis, in 2015. She started using cannabis to alleviate various frustrating symptoms of her condition. Her medical journey led to her professional one, which now allows her to pursue her passions. In 2018, Jasmin co-founded Entourage Network, a women's empowerment organization that cultivates a platform for people to engage and explore Europe's legal cannabis market. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's get into it. So tell me the story of your very first period.
So I remember it actually very, very well. I was 16. I was actually 16 and a half. It was August, and I was in Newquay in Cornwall, and I was on a post-GCSE trip. It was my first trip away from my parents with my friends, and we were about 2 or 3 days into the trip, and we were staying in like this hostel with all my girlfriends, and that's when I first came on my period. And I remember I was like, oh, what am I going to use? Because obviously I didn't have anything with me. And then all of my friends had started their period like years before. Some of them had started them when they were 10, 11, others when they were 13. So I was really the last one to the party, and they handed me a tampon, and I did not feel comfortable using it. At all. Nothing had been up there before, so I didn't really feel comfortable using it. So I was like, oh crap. And I felt quite isolated because I was like, they didn't understand why I didn't want to use a tampon. And then I had to kind of go to the shop and get pads, and I just felt really uncomfortable. And where we were staying in this hostel, it wasn't really that great. It was a 16-year-old's budget. So I actually just got the train home because I just remember I wanted to be with my mum, and I wanted my mum to sort of navigate this time for me.
So you were 16, and you said that your friends had gotten their periods much earlier, so one as early as 10. What did you feel in the lead up to your period arriving? Did you have a sense that it was about to come, did you know what was going to happen in terms of what a period actually was?
So I knew what a period was, and I knew some of my friends had started it theirs. And I remember actually when I was much younger, my best ever friend since I was 7 years of age, when we were about 9, her mum bought us these matching books because we liked everything to be matching: our clothes, our books, absolutely everything. She bought us matching books called Hairs in Funny Places, which describe developing, your breast developing, your period. So and my family's very open, so I was always very aware that I was going to get my period, what it was. But for some reason, because I just didn't get it, and I didn't get it till I don't know what, compared to my peers, was quite late, I just didn't think about it. So I was quite shocked when it happened. Even though I had been in situations before where I could actually also remember now that my cousin came on her period for the first time when we were staying at my dad's house. But even then I remember my dad not really knowing what to do and calling my mum and being like, you need to come and help me. Our niece has just started her period. But I didn't feel any sense of particular symptoms or anything like that leading up to that date in August, when I was just over 16, that I first started.
So you got the train home because you wanted to be with your mom. Totally understandable. And when you got home, what did your mom say?
I don't actually remember that part in a lot of detail, to be honest. I remember she was just like, she was quite encouraging of me to stay, and she was like, you'll be okay, it's fine. But I mean, I never really liked, I've always been quite a homebody anyway, and kind of like being close to my mum. So I was like, just didn't feel comfortable. But I remember she always wanted me to use pads. She wasn't really that comfortable with me using tampons. And then I didn't until I didn't actually start using tampons until after I had had sex.
And did that make a difference?
It just made me feel more comfortable with inserting something inside me. I think that's kind of like where my logic was coming from at the time. But yeah, from then for the next 10 years, I then used tampons like for every period. I never used a sanitary towel.
And what was your relationship like with your period after you talked about the transition from pads to tampons? What about the experience of the period itself?
My period when I was younger was always really, it was an okay experience. I've never really had like a very heavy flow. So things like leaking through my clothes and stuff like that's never happened to me. I've always, like, especially as I've got older, I've got a lot more in tune with my body. So I know exactly when it's going to come, so I don't get caught short. But yeah, it was kind of okay. I didn't really, until I was 26, is when I really started to kind of tune into my body, understand my cycles, start tracking my cycles, kind of like get up into the Q signs of when my period was. And then also, that's also when I became more conscious about using tampons and what kind of contraception I used and how that could potentially affect my period. My periods did get a bit more heavy, and I do actually suffer from sometimes quite severe period pains as well. So the first day of my period is always a bit of a nightmare, and I'm exhausted and I can't really do much. But then it will only last 3 or 4 days thereafter, and it's really light and it's fine.
Talk about why you started tracking your period and what led you, how you started that process.
That was mainly because, so 26 was maybe a bit too early, actually. I think I started that when I was 27. So from the age of maybe 17 to 24, 25, I was on the pill. And then obviously when I was diagnosed with MS at 25, I started looking at my lifestyle very holistically. So I obviously opted for medical cannabis for my choice of drug. I started looking at my skincare routine and eliminating all toxins and potential hormone disruptors from my everyday routines, my diet and lifestyle. And that really got me to thinking of what the pill could potentially be doing to my body and any adverse effects. And I also felt like I just didn't really feel like real emotions while I was on the pill. I found it very confusing. So I wanted to get very, very in tuned in my body. And I didn't want to take contraception. So I wanted to look into natural cycling. And that is when I started to track my period, and have been doing so ever since.
So was it the MS diagnosis that made you come off of the pill?
I was already actually off the pill just because I didn't have a partner at that time. So I came off the pill when I was 24. I didn't have a partner again until I was 26. So I think that had a contributing factor to exploring natural cycles in a lot more detail.
Talk a little bit about that. What happened to you as you came off the pill? I've always found these stories quite interesting because they can vary so widely. So you said a little bit earlier about how you didn't really feel your mood. So talk a little bit about that process.
Well, yeah, I just didn't feel like I'd felt real emotions. And I had also noticed how it disrupted my feelings about someone or my feelings within a relationship, and also like not feeling the like the signs of PMS. So I wasn't really feeling any of these emotions. And once I came off the contraceptive pill, I really started to feel everything a lot more. So I became a lot more in tune with my body, because then I would know when I'm going to come on my period. I would know when I'm ovulating. I'm really sensitive. So like I can really feel even when I'm ovulating. Like I know, like just from like the pains in my stomach or the little twinges that I feel. So I think it just really helped me come into terms with that, and then also just look at other things that I could support myself with, and state of mind and mood, through other natural supplements to support me through my monthly cycle.
It's quite, I'm not saying that 24 is young, but to be able to make that decision that you wanted to feel your moods and you wanted to get more in touch with yourself at that age is quite, I think it's quite astute. I think what my experience of women coming off the pill is typically in their early 30s that they start to think a bit differently about that. So I think it's really interesting that you made that decision when you were so young.
It was heavily influenced. I think like I am basically my mother's twin. I really, really am. My mum has never been on the contraceptive pill before. She's either always on natural cycling or used condoms. And we had these conversations, and, my kind of like holistic approach to life has very much come from her, and probably influenced the type of medicine that I've since used since been diagnosed with MS as well, because we grew up with a homeopath. My whole entire family is vegetarian/vegan. Everything's very plant-based. Everything's very holistic. There is like a lot of use of natural medicine. And so I think that has really influenced me since an extremely young age. So I have always been quite conscious about these things, and then just implemented them again. And they really came to the forefront of my mind once I was diagnosed and had to kind of like evaluate my life and, put strategic things in place and pillars in place to make sure that I was going to continue living my best life with the education that I had kind of like, that I'd received from my family up until that date.
Can you talk a little bit about your MS diagnosis? But before you get into that, can you share for listeners who don't know what MS, multiple sclerosis, is, more about what this condition is?
Yeah, of course. So MS, as you said, is multiple sclerosis. It is a autoimmune disease that affects the brain and spinal cord. And to be more specific, it is the protein that protects the myelin sheath, which is the nerve endings in your brain and spinal cord that it attacks. And I was diagnosed on the 1st of December 2015. I first noticed symptoms from the summer of 2015. One of the triggers of symptoms can be heat. And that summer I was in Marrakesh in July, and it was like 43-degree heat. It was so hot. I literally couldn't do anything. I remember like not even being able to get in the pool because the pool was so warm, and I was like stuck under a parasol the whole time. And then when I got back, I had lost the hearing in my right ear quite considerably. And I was like, this is so weird. But I had also been on like 10 flights that year so far. So I was like, maybe I've been flying too much and it's just affected my ear. But then I kind of also had vertigo, and I was having like extreme exhaustion every day at 4:00. But I left it a couple of months, and then I was like, I also had vibrations down my spinal cord. And I was like, wow, I'm really working out too hard in the gym because I can really feel this in my back. And I was like saying to my other friends, like, after doing loads of sit-ups, do you really feel it in your spine? And they're like, yeah. I was like, you get the tremors? And they're like, yes. I was like, okay, cool. Like, this is normal. And then by September, October time, my hearing hadn't returned. So I was like, okay, I should probably go to the doctors about this now. And I got referred to the nose, ear and throat hospital in King's Cross. And they checked out my ear, and there was like, there's nothing wrong with your eardrum. Like, everything's fine, but you obviously do have quite considerable hearing loss. We can give you a hearing aid, but you should probably just go, it's obviously something to do with your brain, so go for a scan. So they sent me off for an MRI, and then it came back that it was most likely going to be MS, which I was quite shocked about because, again, going off my family history, no one's had any illnesses. There's been kind of like, we haven't even had anyone in the family with cancer. So I'd never really experienced an illness before, or any kind of serious illness in my family. So that was quite a shock. And then, so kind of like that's how I found out I had it. Saying that I'd never experienced any serious illness in my family was actually not true. Thinking back about it, I did actually have quite severe meningitis septicemia when I was 17, which I think could be a contributing factor as to why I maybe then went on to develop MS. Because I did have meningitis when I was 17, and I caught it quite late, so it was quite severe.
So talk about the support that you had around you when you got your diagnosis. You said you were shocked. So what sort of support networks did you lean on?
So my family were really, really supportive, and they still are to this day. I then went and had therapy as well. So I had therapy at the time to deal with it. But if I'm being really honest, the initial shock didn't really last that long. And then my kind of I remember actually sitting in the room with my mum and the doctor telling us, the neurologist telling us, my mum was crying and I just didn't really cry. And I kind of just thought, like, I've kind of always been a things happen for a reason type of person. No point in crying over spilt milk. Though I'm quite an optimistic, so I'm like, okay, that's fine. Like, there is a way to get on with it. I never really had, I never really felt like depressed or hard done by it. I kind of just I think the natural reaction within me was like, okay, like, let's get on with this now. How am I going to fix it? How am I going to manage it? And how am I just going to make sure that this doesn't stop me in achieving any of my goals in life?
Wow. So you had quite a go-getting attitude to then moving forward with MS.
Yeah, definitely. I almost immediately knew that I didn't want to accept any of the disease-modifying drugs. Just because some of them didn't really align with my personal beliefs. And, I'd grown up a vegetarian my whole life. I was already vegan by then as well. And a lot of the medicines were based around animal fats, which I didn't necessarily feel that comfortable putting in my body at the time. The other drug options was like things like chemotherapy. I was only 25. I want to have kids one day. So there were a lot of kind of like factors around it. And then some of them give you a 30% chance of then living with a thyroid issue for the rest of your life, which you have to take more medicine for. So my rationale and thinking at that time, and kind of like, I think because of my family influence always has been, there's a natural alternative way to get on with it.
Mm.
So that's when I really started exploring natural medicines. My granddad is a Rasta from the Caribbean, so he had been using cannabis for the whole of my life, as had other people in my family. So it was something that was very open and discussed and talked about. So I was already aware that cannabis was seen as potential medicine. Also, weirdly enough, on the 2nd of December, the day after I was diagnosed, I started a new job in a business development role. And the first client that I was handed was a company called GW Pharmaceuticals. And they are the biggest medical exporters of cannabis globally. And the one drug they had approved at that time was a drug called Sativex. And it was medical cannabis specifically designed for MS patients.
Oh, wow. So that's like literally like the universe, or whatever you believe, sending something right in your path. That is incredible.
It was super, super weird. And my boyfriend at the time was also a Rasta who ran a hydroponic shop. So he was very deeply ingrained into the cannabis industry already. My granddad had been teaching us our whole lives about this. And then the day after I started that new job, and that was the first client that I was given. So I believe in those signs, basically, and was definitely happy to follow them.
Can you just talk a little bit for listeners who might not be aware of, firstly, what Rastafarians are, um, and the role of cannabis within Rastafarianism?
Yeah, so Rastas don't really like to be referred to as a religious community. They are a collective of people who believe in God, and they follow the Bible, and they believe that cannabis can be used as a sacrament and can basically help bring you to a higher state of meditation, and that can also encourage reasoning, which is a conversation to explore subject matters that you can one day become enlightened on, essentially.
Wow, that's so interesting. And is it
In a very snapshot.
yeah,
I
yeah. I
hope I
mean,
got that right. My
there's so
granddad's going to be
many
like,
there's so many questions I could ask you off the back of that. And so it started in Jamaica, is that right?
yes, it did. So it started in Jamaica. Their prophet, it was started. Well, Rastas follow the word of Marcus Garvey, and Marcus Garvey said, "You look to you look to Africa for the next rising, basically, and he will come in the form of direct. I hope I'm saying this right. I think it is direct lineage of King Solomon, and he will be him and his queen will be seen as equals, and he will be a leader that has not been conquered, and that they see that as Marcus Garvey was talking about Haile Selassie, who him and his wife were crowned on the same day, so they were seen as equals. He's seen as having direct lineage to, I think it is King Solomon. I really hope this is right. And then also they were Ethiopia at that time was a country that was that kind of like fought off the Italians from conquering them. So they saw that as their next leader, and Haile Selassie is the second coming to them and who they follow.
That's so interesting. And in terms of the cannabis element of it, you grew up knowing this about cannabis and the background, and the importance of cannabis to Rastas. So when you got your MS diagnosis, talk about how you started using cannabis to start to alleviate some of your symptoms.
So it's quite funny because even though I grew up like around it and knowing the benefits, I didn't actually ever use it myself. So I wasn't really like a recreational cannabis user. So it wasn't my first experience, but it was still one of my very early experiences. So I started to smoke it. So anytime that I got aches and pains, frustrating symptoms, I would smoke it, and it would literally relieve my symptoms within like 10 to 15 seconds. It was always very quickly. However, cannabis affects everybody differently, and I was not somebody who was a functional stoner. So I would always have to wait until the evening, until I was done with work, for me to be able to medicate. One of the other ways that I quite liked consuming it was in food. So I quite liked edibles just because I liked cooking, and it was quite a different creative way of doing it. And then also sometimes it's just really easy. So if you don't always want to smoke, then I could just like eat a chocolate truffle that tastes absolutely delicious. And it's going to have the same effects. Another way that I started using it was in topicals. So obviously, like I said, when I was at work, I'm not able to consume, and I'm also just not able to like function So I used topical application and I would bring that to work with me. So if I ever did have like sore knees or sore hips, was muscles, leg muscles were like my symptoms at that time, then I would use a topical application, which would again give me a lot of relief, and kind of hence where Ohana was birthed from, through falling in love with the topical use. After about 2 years, because I was working in the space and I had really, really good, a good overview to the formulation scientist, the pharmacovigilance team, and really understanding for the first time the actual science behind it, and understanding the science behind cannabis, how it interacts with our bodies, how it interacts with our brain, the entourage effect, and how it kind of like, how it was helping me. Like I said, I was a business developer at the time, so I've always been quite inquisitive, and I really had like a thirst for knowledge. So I started to go to expos and events. I've dragged my mum to Prague and Barcelona and Vegas. I don't think my mum would ever be going to so many cannabis events with her daughter, to be honest, but it happened. And at one of them, we discovered CBD. And I took that, and it had the exact same effect that the cannabis did for me, but it was non-psychotropic, which just essentially means that I did not get high from it. It just attaches to different receptors, it affects in different ways, and you don't get high. So I switched from using full spectrum cannabis to CBD. So I didn't experience that high feeling, essentially.
I on a personal level, I love using CBD. I use it so I still sometimes get really painful periods. So I use it when my periods are really painful, and the effect is it's just amazing. You can feel the relief within, like, for me, it's at least like 10 minutes. And I really love it. Talk a little bit about your company. So Ohana, you talked about your journey from you smoking cannabis and using topical cannabis with THC to then where you started Ohana with CBD. What made you go into this direction of deciding to actually build a company for yourself?
So by this time, I think I'm like 2 years into medicating with cannabis and using CBD, and I just really loved it. It was like, I would sit at my desk in the city, and it was like all I wanted to talk about, basically. So it was a bit distracting for everyone from work. And on reflection, I think I only ever got away with it because my family member was the CEO of the company. Otherwise, I don't think it would have been really as tolerated, to be honest, talking about cannabis all day. And it made me very reflective of wanting to live my most authentic self and my most authentic life. And I definitely couldn't do that in the job that I was doing, because essentially I was just working with a lot of pharmaceutical companies, which I didn't, I had questions that you probably shouldn't have when you're working so closely with them, and that can maybe be seen as antagonistic, and it just didn't really fit my kind of my lifestyle at that time. And saying that, I always like to disclose, like, I'm 100% not against allopathic medicine. Obviously, when I had MS, when I had meningitis, obviously it absolutely saved my life. It just wasn't the route that I was ready to take then. But I'm still in full support of it and absolutely love it, and very, very grateful for the purposes of it and the way it serves us in everyday life. But yeah, and I kind of just didn't really feel like I was being my most authentic self. And I thought, you know what, I've got MS. It's an unpredictable disease. I want to make sure that I am living my life exactly how I want to, and to be able to be myself 100%, because that is something else I think really affects people's symptoms. I think a lot of it can be a state of mind and our environments and the people that we surround ourselves with. So I was like, okay, I want to leave this job and I want to start a job, and I knew I wanted it to be in the cannabis or CBD industry. I wanted to culminate all my passions. So after CBD, my second passion was clean beauty. So like I had mentioned, I'd grown up on a very natural lifestyle. My mum had always made our skincare at home. she was very against me using sort of like, traditional deodorant. And then at the age of 17 and 18, I'd kind of like wavered from that path into using kind of like everyday products that all my friends were using. That, if my friends were using Simple, I wanted to use Simple. If they were using Nivea, I wanted to use Nivea, and kind of just piling all this crap onto my body, which then, again, when I was diagnosed, I looked at it and I thought, you know what, the average woman applies over 120 chemicals on her body every day. It builds up a toxic load, and I need to make sure that I am removing all of this from my body. So I kind of, went back to how I was brought up and then looked at clean beauty. I've always been really obsessed with skincare and looking after my skin. So it basically was a culmination of my passions at that time, which was CBD, clean beauty. And what I wanted to do, what I really wanted is I always wanted clean beauty, but I really wanted it to work. So what I looked at with Ohana is producing highly efficacious skincare products with clinically validated ingredients that have really similar results as a traditional counterparts would to produce highly functional natural skincare. So that's kind of how it came about.
That's so interesting. And I think whenever I hear stories of female entrepreneurs and their journey, it's just to starting their business, it's so different, but there was always this one moment, this spark that they have that gets them going. And then, it's interesting to hear the journey that they take from that spark. So with the products there, you have a range. And so I know I've spoken to another female founder of a CBD brand, and she says that due to regulations, you can't you can't talk about any kind of medical properties or make any claims about the product. So she has to talk about it as skincare, but she says that, she can say anecdotally in conversation that, it can affect certain areas of your health and you can use it for period pain. Is it similar for you?
Yeah, so we try and lead with education. So if we lead with education, I think this is really important for this market as well, where education it's still a very new, novel ingredient that people don't know that much about. But if we lead with education, then they know what it is, so they can make their own minds up with how they use it. I have my story on the website, which sometimes does come up as a bit of an issue. And also we will post blogs. So we do post a lot of educational content. I remember we did actually post a blog a couple of weeks ago of how CBD could actually potentially help with psoriasis because of its anti-inflammatory properties. And the MHRA did actually email me and be like, take this down right now. So I was like, okay, oops. But how we have overcome that is using the clinically proven plant-based actives. So for example, in our all-in-one Wonder Balm, our active is called Daimoloctive. It's clinically proven to be double anti-inflammatory free radical. And it's in studies, it was mostly studied with the use of if you suffer from rosacea. So we have an ingredient in that which we can make claims for that can help with rosacea.
Where do you think the industry needs to go in order to connect the overwhelming anecdotal benefits of CBD with what's available right now in terms of clinical research and clinical evidence?
I think that we need more. There needs to be more studies, which I think is definitely going to happen now. The regulations in America are changing where a lot of the educations come from. There's a lot of education that comes from Israel as well. They are kind of like spearheading the science-backed kind of evidence. A lot of the evidence that's coming out, as is Canada, because it's a complete legalized country now. But I think education is just the most important thing. And I see it one day as becoming like, a vitamin, just an everyday vitamin like vitamin D would be, or vitamin C, and it becoming a kind of like an everyday ingredient into a multitude of products that we use that ties into well-being and our health. But I do think there needs to be a really strong educational drive from brands, and that's what we've done. A year before we launched, we just focused on education. So we just put out content, we put out interviews, we just really try to educate our consumer as much as possible. So we don't even necessarily have to make claims because people know what they're using it for. So, we get a lot of people that are maybe trying to manage arthritis pain, or similar to me, like MS pain, or like knee pains. My cousin's got fibromyalgia, she uses it. My uncle's got lupus and he has a lupus rash on his nose, he uses it. My niece has eczema, we've used it on my niece. So I think it's really just that education point that needs to be really driven, and I think there needs to be more quality from the brand owners to drive that, basically.
And in terms of the industry, what I've seen from what I've read and different videos that I've seen online is that it, at the moment, is very male dominated. And you set up the Entourage Network, which is a women's empowerment organization for people to engage and explore the cannabis market in Europe. What do you think needs to be done to bring more women into the space?
So, Jessica Steinberg, who's a PhD student at Oxford, exploring a subject matter on cannabis, which I can never actually remember off the top of my head. It's a very, very long, it's got a very long name. But me and Jess met in a cannabis co-working space back in 2018. We were the only females there, so we were like, okay, we're going to be friends. We both have similar interests, and there's no other women about. And what, from my research and from kind of like, traveling across Europe and America, what I had seen is that in America, they had a very high level of women in C-suite level positions and above. But as every state legalized, that number would decline because, other industries come into it. And the same thing has happened in the UK. So that we do have a really high level of female founders and female entrepreneurs in the space. But as legalization becomes more dominant, you get other industries coming into it. So you've got the VC world coming into it, finance, insurance, lawyers, like really traditional industries that are already male dominated. So it's very, very hard to have an equal female representation. However, because there is no blueprint of the cannabis industry, it is a really, really amazing opportunity for there to be equality from the offset. So I think it was really important for us at that time, as in the UK, it's a nascent industry, that we put in place a structure that allows women to be at the forefront of the industry and to have an equal stake in it as well. I think some of the issues that we have is, again, just like I said, it's traditional industries coming into it that are led by men. And then also it just comes down to the whole financing piece as well. It's in securing outside investment. Women only get like 0.2% of outside funding for their company as it is. As being a woman of color, being a black woman, that, I'm in a 0.2% bracket of that. So we like to put together sessions and workshops that are going to enable women to overcome these issues.
Can you talk a little bit more about being a Black woman in this industry? So in the US, for example, the majority of people who are in prison for cannabis offenses are Black. I don't know what the figures are in the UK.
Pretty similar.
Okay. And then you see the people, as you mentioned, who are leading this industry, they are overwhelmingly white. So talk a little bit about your view and your vision as a Black woman in this industry.
So when I first started, I wasn't really that conscious of it, but as I have grown in confidence and my voice and my position within the industry, then I have started to recognize it a lot more and become a lot more vocal about it. So I've been to a lot of the conferences in this industry can be really expensive as well. So I've been to £400 a day, £800 a day, £1,000 a day conferences, and there is a significant lack of Black people or ethnic minorities and women at these conferences. So what I make sure that I do is make the people who are holding the events accountable. So I ask them what they're doing, what their initiatives are to increase equality and increase an equal representation. One just happened the other day, actually. There is a group called Minorities for Medical Marijuana. It's an American group, but they do have a subset in the UK. And there was an event happening, an online event happening. And I emailed the CEO and I was like, look, I've been to one of your events in the past. There's an absolute lack of diversity with the attendees. Can you give me some tickets so I can distribute them between the Minorities for Medical Marijuana group, which they were happy to do so. So I think it is just about having a voice. I remember once I was also sitting in one of the poshest private members clubs in Mayfair, and I went to meet someone about investment, and they were discussing projects that they had going on, and they had a project going on in Africa at the time, and they were really, really excited about it, and they wanted to distribute money into Ohana. And my question to them was, okay, can you explain to me what you are then doing to empower the African people in the local areas, and then also with jobs and, uplifting the community? And they were immediately unable to answer that to me. And that for me is absolutely unacceptable. And expressing how that needs to change, and that I wouldn't be necessarily willing to work with a company like that because it's not aligned with my values. So I think holding each other accountable, being aware, and again, back to the education piece is really important for Black people, because in the UK, it's still not different. You're still 14 times more likely to be stopped and searched for cannabis if you're a Black male in the UK. You're still, more likely to get harsher penalties and sentences. So obviously that is something that I feel very passionate about and hope to continue to have a voice that can hopefully make a change.
If someone's listening to this podcast and this is thinking, okay, what can I do to make a change in this sector? What can I do? I'm really shook by these stats that Jasmin has said about penalties and harsher penalties and stop and search. What can I do? What would you advise them?
I think we're getting that advice. I think it starts, with everything that's happening at the moment in the world and the drive of Black Lives Matter, and each and every one of us, everyone just educating themselves more and becoming aware of their unconscious bias. I had this conversation with one of my old colleagues the other day. I said, I know you never realized it at the time, but this is every point of which I remember that you expressed a racist remark in front of me that made me feel extremely uncomfortable. And I think, with how much education there's going on and awareness out there at the moment, this is a really good time to kind of educate yourself and be mindful of it. And I think we all have to do it. I think everybody has unconscious biases. And I think it's really important that we all just use the many, many tools that are available and out there at the moment that we see every day on social media, we see every day on Instagram, we see every day in our WhatsApp groups from our friends and family, and just making sure that we're educating each other as much as possible, and then also just having the confidence to keep those around us accountable.
How can people find out more about your product? So you've just had a launch, I think, is it earlier is it last week you had a launch? How can people access your products?
Yep. So we launched last Monday. Our Instagram is at Ohana. You can research our products at ohana-cbd.com. You will see the 3 products that we have on offer. So what we do is, I think like we mentioned earlier, we use plant-based actives combined with to produce high-functioning skincare. The benefits of CBD are the kind of the evidence that we have so far to be anti-inflammatory, anti-aging. It's full of omega-3s and fatty acids, and it's really good for controlling free radicals, etc. So they're the kind of benefits. We have 3 products. We have got an all-in-one Wonder Balm, we have a night repair oil, and we have a day defense serum that is used for anti-pollutant. So, for example, we use Marine Cell Shield, which is a clinically active, proven active that helps protect your skin against outside pollutants. And Marine Blue Vital C, which is, again, a clinically proven active that combats signs of aging and hyperpigmentation. On our website, you'll be able to see like all our products, all the information. We make it very transparent. So, we state that we're cruelty, vegan, GMO and palm oil free. And we'll break it down. So, I've never really been a fan of this term 100% natural, because I think that's very misleading. So we break it down to be very specific. So all our products are, maybe around 99.7% natural or 97.3% natural. So we try and be as honest and transparent as possible. And yeah, you just get more education around our products and what we're doing differently and how we are leading the CBD skincare industry for the UK.
Amazing. Well, congratulations on the launch. I'm really excited.
Thank you so much.
Try your products, dive into the website, try your products. If listeners take one thing away from everything that you've said on this podcast, what would you want that to be?
I would say, I always find this really difficult question. I've actually been asked this quite a few times in the last few weeks. And I always want to say, have a positive mindset. But I know that is not easy for everybody. And I don't like it. I don't like it to come across that I'm being nonchalant about that. My one bit of advice for everybody... my one bit of advice actually is to always make sure that you have confidence in your voice and you are living your most authentic self.
Brilliant.
I think everything else falls into place after that.
Absolutely. I love that because I really relate to that right now. I was talking to someone yesterday about how I felt like in the last couple of months, it's my throat chakra had opened up and I have finally found my voice after hiding it and suppressing it for so long. So I really relate to what you've just said.
Yeah, I love that. I just think, and I think it's the same. I think we're all going through a conscious shift at the moment where we are empowering ourselves and we're feeling more confident for our voices to be heard, especially as women. And I think that's really important. Our mission for Ohana is first and foremost to just empower women to live their best lives, essentially.
Let's live your best life, like Oprah
live your
taught
best
us.
life. Yeah, that's the best thing to live by. What you're doing in life. It's like, I'm literally every day I wake up and I just try and live my best life. That is it.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on the show, Jasmin. It's been so great to chat to you. And for listeners, all of the links and to what Jasmin has been talking about and to Ohana will be in the show notes. So check those out and definitely head over to Jasmin's Instagram. So Ohana at Ohana CBD and check out her products. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. It's been a great way to start the day.
For more inspiring conversations, head over to periodstorypod.com, where we have so many more for you to peruse. If you want help with your menstrual or hormone health, email me on hello@eatlovemove.com to set up a free 30-minute hormone health review. If you like today's show, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Tag us, come say hi, and send in your requests for who you'd like to see on the show on Instagram and Twitter on @periodstorypod, or email us at hello@periodstorypod.com. I'm Lenny's Brothers, and you've been listening to Period Story. Thank you so much for listening.